Good morning all and welcome to the meeting of Environment, Infrastructure and Economic Development for the 29th of March 2023. At the top table we have first of all Barbara Renton, our Executive Director, Adam Taylor from Committee Services, Bailey Mike Williamson as Vice Convener and myself as Convener. Can I now ask Adam to confirm the attendance and ask for any apologies?
Thanks, Convener. We've had apologies submitted this morning from Councillor Harvey with Councillor Donaldson substituting and also Councillor Waters with Councillor Massey substituting. Instead of running down the whole list asking people if they're here, I'll just confirm that all members are present here in the chambers with the exception of Councillor Duff, who will be joining online and may be slightly late.
Thank you for that. I'm aware that Councillor Duff has intimated that he'll be joining somewhat later, so we'll proceed at the moment without him and hopefully he will join in due course. If I can just ask members to indicate questions and comment in the normal way for a hybrid meeting, and can I ask now for declarations of interest in respect of today's business? I see none. Can we therefore move on to item 3, the minutes, and can we agree the minutes from our meeting held on the 16th of November 2022? It seems a lifetime away now. Agreed. Thank you very much. Can we also agree the minutes from our special meeting held on the 6th of March 2023 in respect of the Gran Fondo? Agreed. Thank you very much. Moving on to item 4. We have a motion, the reassessment of conservation areas in Perth and Kinross. Can I ask Councillor Kigali to move this motion?
I'm delighted to move this motion for the second time now, as was already approved at the Climate and Sustainability Committee as something that they thought was very important, which I was glad about. I'm not going to overdo the actual forwarding here, as some of you will probably be hearing it for the second time or have picked up essentially what I'm going to say again in the media. But what we're really trying to do here is allow people in Perth and Kinross that want to do the right thing to be able to make their homes more sustainable. Look, it's frustrating we can't solve the entire issue overnight, but I'm hopeful that the combination of our reviewing what is a worthwhile conservation area and calling on the Scottish Government to play their role and review what's a permitted development, that we can begin to reform local planning and conservation rules in a meaningful way. Too often, archaic permitted development rules and conservation area designations, coupled with overly restrictive interpretations of the rules, limit worthy development and environmentally beneficial adjustments to properties. The first step in changing that is bringing our conservation area rules in line with our priorities for sustainability and fighting climate change. The Council's tool through which to do that is reviewing what should and should not be a conservation area. I believe Councillor Waters is writing to whoever the relevant minister was or potentially is after tomorrow, and I hope the convener will coordinate with him on that if he's not already done that. I understand that given the broader circumstances, that might take a bit of time before that's clear, especially if the government structure changes. But yeah, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to forward this for the second time.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Councillor Forbes to second the motion?
Thanks very much, Convener. Talking just very specifically and indeed very briefly about the issue of solar panels and conservation areas, I understand the LRB overturned two planning restrictions recently in regard to solar panels, which I think indicates just exactly why this is necessary. So, as I said the last time, I think these rules are well past their sell-by date, and I think it's time they're looked at again. I'm glad we're able to bring this motion, and it would appear that we have the support of the full council to do so. So happy to second.
Thank you very much. Perhaps not the support of the full council, and we'll test whether the committee is fully in support. Thank you. I see request for point of clarification first from Bailey.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you for bringing this, Councillors Kigali and Forbes. Point of clarification is I wanted to ask what's the current policy on the review of conservation areas? I can see that this motion would see us have to do each one on average every 4.5 years. How frequently are they reviewed at the moment? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Barbara Renton David Littlejohn will respond to that.
There's no legal requirement to review conservation areas. There is a legal requirement to ensure the implementation of measures to enhance the conservation area. So that's what we currently focus on. We do intend to review the conservation areas. We always have intended to do that, subject to availability of staff resource. It is a time-consuming exercise. It requires proper and thorough review. It requires evidence to be gathered. It requires full public consultation, and it requires ministerial support for any changes to conservation area boundaries. As was alluded to earlier by Councillor Kigali, of course, we can't change the permitted development rules. So what you can and can't do in conservation areas is not a matter for discretion of officers. But as was mentioned earlier, the Scottish Government is undertaking a consultation on whether to allow certain non-permanent energy measures to be permitted development within conservation areas.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart, do you have a point of clarification?
Thanks, Convener. Can I just check how many conservation areas we have in Perth and Kinross?
I think it's quite a large number. David?
The number's just going out of my head, but it's into the many tens. I just forgotten the figure off the top of my head. We can provide that to you, but it is significant.
Barbara's indicating that it's 21. Thank you. Moving on now to comment and questions. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. And just the research I did, there's 21 areas that have been the subject of conservation area appraisals, including Cleash, but I don't think you can count that as an appraisal. Can I just say I, like so many, support this motion. There's two parts to it. The second part clearly is hopefully that can proceed with pace. It's a review into permitted development rights, and we've heard that there's the Scottish Government have given undertakings in terms of consultation and the like. However, can I turn to the first paragraph, because we are told that there should be a minimum of 4 reviews per annum. Now, I'm very pleased to hear this from the Conservatives, and I entirely agree with them. Indeed, I do wonder, because of a number of the appraisals that have been undertaken already, where a lot of the historic work on history and local environment has already been done in previous appraisals, whether indeed it could even be more than 4 per annum. But let us see on that. But what I must say is to be told that there should be a minimum of 4 reviews per annum, and I'm sure that will indeed happen. The last administration between 2017 and 2022, I have to ask how many conservation area appraisals were carried out. Was it 4 per annum? No. Was it even 4? No. In actual fact, the answer is 0. None were carried out, and the last conservation area appraisal carried out was, incidentally, in Instour in 2015. So I think we've got to bear that in mind, but I'm very pleased to see the Conservatives now being converted to the need for these appraisals. Now, why do we need them? And obviously there's going to have to be changes for environmental standards. One, I think they are an important part of the planning process, and I think that's particularly important with the new National Planning Framework, although I'm not a planner, and also with the Local Development Plan 3. So I think we should be up to speed as possible, as far as possible, with those appraisals. Secondly, they're not just documents of interest, although they can be indeed, but also they tie in with community action plans. And just to show I'm not being localist, We've got here the Pitlochry Conservation Area appraisal. Ask how many conservation area appraisals were carried out. Right, something's happening there. I didn't expect to hear but there's the one for Pitlochry, and then there's the recent community action plan for Pitlochry. Now, in many ways, these two documents actually go together, and I think they can indeed work together. The third point, and I think very important, and I used to go on about conservation area regeneration schemes, CARS, and we weren't very successful over the last 10 years in rounds 5 to 8 in obtaining funding there. That has changed to now being the place. I think it's the Places and Heritage Fund. I also forget what it's Places and Heritage and Places Fund. But they are important documents in terms of obtaining external funding. So I think that is a key point to make. And also, if I look at places like, for instance, under CARS, Cooper got a significant amount of money, and then we're able to use that to then syndicate with other grant-making bodies. So I think it really, it's even if it's $500,000 or $1 million from Places and Heritage Fund, then that can have a multiplier effect. So I very much support this motion, but and hopefully we can now proceed with this. I would suspect the Perth and Kinross Heritage Trust might be able to assist as well, given their database of information, but it's certainly something we should do, and hopefully we can proceed also with pace on the question of what should be the development rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to Councillor Robertson, who has a question.
Thank you, Convener. Could someone tell me exactly what this motion is meant to address? I realise that there are restrictions within conservation areas about what is permitted and what isn't, but also in conservation areas there's various listings of properties. So could somebody just explain, does this mean that, for example, if it's grade 1 listed, you'd be allowed to put solar panels on the roof, or what exactly is this meant to address?
I think I'll pass to David Littlejohn, who said he'll answer, but David, over to you.
Yeah, just to re-clarify, within conservation areas, there is no permitted development, so any development requires a planning application to be submitted and then considered on its own merits. Whereas outside conservation areas, some development, including solar panels, don't require planning permission. So the review of conservation areas would simply look at a reassessment of the heritage and architectural merit of those places, and a decision made as to whether the boundaries are correct, or whether in some cases the boundary could be reduced because the value of that built heritage is no longer seen to be protectable. In other cases, it might result in some parts being included in conservation areas. But what this review or series of reviews won't do and can't do is change any of those permitted development rights. That's a legislative requirement that does require ultimately the Scottish Government, following consultation, to decide whether or not to amend the permitted development rights regulations. And none of this will affect listed buildings. Listed buildings have specific protection, and all developments and all proposals relating to listed buildings will continue to require listed building consent. So it won't be affected by either the Conservation Area Review or indeed the Scottish Government's current consultation on permitted development rights within conservation areas. Hopefully that helps explain it a little bit further, Councillor Robertson.
It does indeed. Thanks so much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Littlejohn, for that. In view of the question and comment, Councillor Kigali, would you like to briefly sum up?
Very briefly, I'd just like to say I'm glad to hear this is something that is, stretching across the chamber. And I would say to everybody that this is the kind of issue where it's incredibly important to look forward and move forward and see what we can do in the future. And hopefully make a positive change for some of those people in Perth and Ross that have been frustrated by the fact that they can't do what they very strongly believe is the right thing. And hopefully we can go and do some part in trying to empower those people and those communities to do that.
Thank you very much. Can we agree the motion? Agreed. Thank you. We move now to paper 6, the active travel strategy. And I would ask Brian Cargill. Oh, sorry. I'm leaping unwittingly ahead of myself. We now move to item 5, the outstanding business statement. Can we agree to remove the one action that's showing there as complete? Agreed. Thank you. And we now move to item 6, the active travel strategy. And can I ask Brian Cargill, the Traffic and Network Service Manager, to introduce the report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. This report details the cycling, walking and safer routes projects that were implemented in 2022-23. It also seeks committee approval for the proposed list of cycling, walking and safer routes projects for 2023-24. During 2022-23, Perth and Kinross Council received a capital grant of $973,000 for cycling, walking and safer routes projects. And it's anticipated that in 2023-24, the Council will receive a further grant of $672,000 for cycling, walking and safer routes projects. The purpose is to undertake a programme of works for local cycling, walking and safer routes. It's included in the terms and conditions of the grant that there's a provision that local authorities shall consider a minimum spend of $36,000 and preferably above 50%, on works and promotion relating to cycling. Transport Scotland's long-term vision for active travel in Scotland is to make walking and cycling the most popular choice for shorter everyday journeys by making it safer, easier and available for everyone. At its meeting on the 14th of March 2022, the then Environment and Infrastructure Committee approved a list of works to be funded from the anticipated 2022-23 Scottish Government grant of $665,000. However, the actual grant received was significantly higher. It was $973,000, and details of the various schemes approved and how the funding was spent that year are listed in Appendix 1. In total, over £1 million of actual works were funded in 2022-23 from the CWSR grant and other external funding grants. As approximately 52% of the 22-23 grant funding was spent on cycling related works, the terms and the conditions of the grant were met. We also received additional funding of $65,000 from TACTRAN in order to deliver a project at Potenzie Road in Crieff, and a further $55,000 was also received from TACTRAN to deliver a project at Primrose Crescent in Perth, and a further $30,000 was received to deliver a project at Station Road Errol. The schemes which have been identified for implementation in 2022-23 are listed in Appendix 2, and the associated plans for the proposed works during 2022-23 are shown in Appendix 3. In addition, an application will be submitted to Sustrans for match funding in May 23, and in addition, an application will be submitted to TACTRAN for match funding for some projects in May 23 also. All the schemes listed in Appendix 2 will be implemented within the financial year if match funding applications are successful. And if any applications are unsuccessful, then as usual, those projects with successful match funding will be prioritised. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Cargill. We have a first question from Councillor Duff. John, I'm happy you've been able to join us. Thank you.
Thank you for your forbearance as well, Convener. Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Cargill, for the report. I appreciate this is something that comes to us on an annual basis, and it's always, I think, of interest to ward members. And you just touched on about prioritising. That's what my question was going to be about. How are the projects, listed in the report prioritised for funding? And then just as a kind of follow up to that, how are these projects prioritised against some of the other works that we have in terms of works of these nature that are not funded through the cycling, walking and safer routes funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question. We receive a number of requests for measures throughout the whole of Perth and Kinross from communities, from elected members and from individuals. All these requests are filtered into a road safety priority list that we've compiled over the last couple of years, which I think my last quote is it's over 920 or so that are on that list. These are all scored and ranked. And what we then have to do is to siphon out the ones that would be appropriate for us to deliver using the Cycling, Walking, Safer Routes funding. There is criteria that the Scottish Government place on us to deliver projects under that heading. And this year, for the first time, we have an officer, a dedicated officer from the Scottish Government who meets on a regular basis to assess what we are delivering. So the way the projects are brought to the table are we score them. If we feel that they will meet the Scottish Government's criteria, they're added into our list to be delivered that financial year.
Okay,
thank you. And if I may add, Mr. Cargill, there's also a series of ward meetings now taking place at which ward councillors can contribute to the assessment of the priorities. Thank you.
Absolutely, Convener, thanks for that, adding that in. Yeah, the team have found it very, very helpful to meet on a regular basis with the ward members, because although we're scoring the projects using engineering criteria, it has been very, very helpful to meet with the members to get the local input and the local priorities. And that again helps us put projects at the top of the list for us to deliver throughout the year.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Right, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Brian. Like Councillor Duff, can I also thank Brian Cargill for this report. I said under the earlier motion I wasn't going to be localist, but here I will to some degree. Could I just ask Brian on two specific points? You refer under 4.7 to the Potenzie Road project, and that's been ongoing. Have the letters gone out now informing local residents? I think the project is going to be delayed now until the end of April. And the second point, I might as well just take in one go, is on page 24, under item 12, you mentioned about King Street, Commissioner Street. It's highlighted red. It's the build out at that area. Of King Street, Commissioner Street. I seem to recall that's been deferred from last year. I think it's even deferred from the year before. Will that definitely go ahead in 23-24? Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Donaldson. Yeah, the first question about Potenzie Road, that there has been significant delays there. We had issues with, I think it's the Scottish Forestry Commission getting approval and planning, getting approval from them to remove some trees. That's now been secured, and the project is now progressing and will be completed hopefully early next month. I think your question was also about have the letters went out. I can't honestly say off the top of my head, but I can certainly check on that and get back to you. The second question was about King Street, Commissioner Street. That's a project that we've, as you quite rightly point out, we've endeavoured to do over a number of years. I think the problems that we've had is that as you start the year, the estimated costs at the start of the year may not be the final cost that you encounter when you actually deliver the project, and at some point you may have to drop a project that year. This has been one of the victims, but I think what has happened in recent times, obviously the works on the hotel, so that's delayed us, but also the travel patterns of the children going to and from the school have also changed significantly as a result of the school location. So it's a project that we believe in and we would love to deliver, but I think the the justifications for it have perhaps shifted, and there's also been delays due to some of the adjacent issues with the hotel.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. Just to say, if you could provide us with an update on the King Street Commissioner Street project, I'd like to come back to you separately, and hopefully we'll have another one of these ward meetings, which I think all 3 ward councillors did find very useful, very helpful. But he is also on the Sochi Road path, Ryan Place, and also whether that will link in eventually around to Milnab Street, where there's quite a bit of work going on just now. But I'll come back to you on that separately. But thanks very much.
Thank you. We now move to Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. I'm going to return to something Councillor Duff touched on earlier, and I was wondering about the kind of time pressure, if you like, that we were under to deliver these projects previously in the last year or so. And I know that we've talked about this magic list of which I think a few years ago was 800 and something items, which I now understand is somewhere north of 900. Has dealing with this stuff had an impact on our ability to deliver the other stuff, for want of a better phrase? And hopefully Brian understands my question.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Absolutely, it has impacted. It's the same team that delivers the active travel measures, as delivers a weighting restriction, as delivers a speed limit, as delivers a bend warning sign. So it has been quite difficult in the last couple of years, trying to keep all the plates spinning. This has always been a priority to deliver the Cycle and Walking Safer Routes funding. It's a major grant fund that we get. I think we've targeted a lot of our projects in the vicinity of schools. We believe that that's where the money should be spent, and we believe also that we should spend this money in the communities right across the geographic area of Perth and Kinross. So that has been a priority for us, but it has definitely impacted on other areas that we're responsible for.
Thanks for that, Brian. And what would have happened if we hadn't delivered it? Would that money in part have to be sent back?
Yes, it's a case of use it or lose it, and I think that's one of the reasons why the Scottish Government this year have put a dedicated officer to work with the local authorities, because this time last year, we were a bit earlier actually than this last year, we were contacted by Scottish Government and asked if we could use funding that hadn't been used by other local authorities, and we were never one to look at a gift horse in the mouth, and we gladly accepted that and managed to spend that money. So we have a very good track record of delivery of the CWSR funding, but if we don't use it, yes, we do lose it.
Thank you. Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, convener. There'll be 2 questions, but I'll come back afterwards. I think the first question is, in Appendix 1, we've got the list of works that were scheduled and are either completed or not completed in 22-23. For any of the not completed ones, why don't they appear, or for some of the not completed ones, why don't they then appear in the 23-24?
I mentioned earlier on that the Scottish Government have this year put a dedicated officer in place. Part of the remit is to ensure that we're spending the money, so we have to regularly give updates on our profile spend. The second part of that is to ensure that the projects that we are delivering meet their criteria. Now, we've never had this in place in the past. We've been really left to get on with delivering these projects. The Scottish Government have an outlook that the projects now going forward should be more strategic, whereas we've always tried to deliver projects that we thought meant a lot and delivered a lot for local communities, and that just might be a small £15,000 bit of footpath, but it links a housing estate to a school. The Scottish Government want us to spend more on larger projects. So the projects that were on the list that perhaps don't appear, we still believe that they deserve to be delivered, and we'll use alternative budgets that we have at our disposal to deliver these. So it's not that they will not be delivered, it's that they'll be delivered using other funding.
Thank you, and I'll come back to you, Colin, for your second question. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. At item 4.8 on page 14, you mention a number of projects that have been provided in the vicinity of schools that will encourage active travel, which helps children travelling to and from school. Can you share some of these projects? The reason I ask that is I see that there's things there about 2.5 metre accesses and what have you, but we've got some particular issues in Ward 7, and I'd just like to understand how I can mirror those in that ward, and would it be possible to meet later on to discuss that further? Thank you.
Yeah, the types of projects that we've delivered in the vicinity of schools primarily have been missing footpath links, and these are usually brought to our attention by the members, by community councils, by parents, by individuals, and are added onto that road safety list. But we also have the ability to deliver traffic calming measures in the vicinity of schools as well. So we would welcome any suggestions from yourselves, from any members or any communities for any projects to be added to that list.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Mr Cargill, for this report. I've got a question on the Council's strategic implications. On page 18.22 under revenue, it says that routine maintenance coming out of the budget will be £3,000. That seems an awful low amount for routine maintenance. Can you elaborate on what kind of maintenance is required to this, and what, if that figure is correct?
The maintenance is an anticipated cost. The reality is that when you introduce a new measure, the hope is that you shouldn't require any maintenance in the short term. So it's really just an indication. We may occasionally get damage to a bollard or damage to a piece of infrastructure that requires to be replaced. But if you're providing a new footpath, then that footpath should not require any major maintenance for a number of years. So it's really just an indicative cost.
Thank you. And Bailey McLaren, you have a point of clarification at this point.
Thank you, Convener. Yes. Apologies if that's not how I should have addressed this. On the appendix of the proposed footpath, Castlebrae Hunting Tower is listed as Ward 9, Almond and Erne. I'm believing it to be Ward 5, Strathtay. So that is just, could Mr Cargill possibly clarify that? Might not be able to do it just now, but later on.
I'm sure without looking perhaps at a detailed map, it would be hard to definitively determine exactly in which ward it lies now, but I'm sure if there's a correction to be made, it will be made. Thank you. We now move to Councillor Stewart's second question.
Thanks, Convener. Reflecting on the shared use path between Cwmbrangus and Woodside, similarly at the other end of Burlton, there is a pavement there, but it's one of those pavements which has essentially become overgrown, and I wouldn't propose adding that into the schedule, but I just wondered how we dealt with the existing infrastructure, but which is not up to scratch, and who would be responsible for addressing those issues, so that we get more connectivity overall without necessarily the capital investment.
Yeah, matters such as that would be carried out by our road maintenance partnership colleagues. But certainly, I would be delighted if there are any areas like that out there. If you bring it to my attention, there may be quick wins. There may be something that we can deliver easier and make a big difference. So we're always open to suggestions from the members.
Thank you. And my apologies, Councillor Welch, you had your first question.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you, convener, and thanks to the work that pulling this committee paper together, and Brian and his team for the work that they do. It's much appreciated in the wards. In terms of I'm a keen cyclist. In terms of the strategic plans for extending the green cycling routes on rural roads, it would be useful to understand, what the strategic direction for that is, please.
And thank you, Councillor Welsh, for that question. Yeah, over a number of years now, the road safety team have provided a number of green routes throughout the Perth and Kinross area. I think we've reached a stage where nationally Perth and Kinross is recognised as one of the leaders in the delivery of these, and there is certainly interest from many other local authorities to what we have delivered in Perth and Kinross, even as far as wide as down south, where we've had English authorities contacting us to find out how we've went about delivering these. There's no magic secret to it. It's a case of if there's a suggestion brought to the table, we'll happily look at these suggestions. I think the important thing is to ensure that we're linking communities to communities or communities to a facility. We don't take, I always put it in my head as a family with children on their cycles to an A-class road, which you would not deem as being suitable for them to cycle on. So if there are potential links out there, we're always happy to look at these and welcome these suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now move to Councillor Forbes for your second question.
Thanks, convener. On section 4.15, where it references the rule of 55% of grant funding has to be spent on cycling works, although it references it in other places too. But a couple of sort of straightforward questions on this. I assume that the other percentage would be spent simply on walking, or would it be some other kind of active travel? And my second part to that question is, as a new but very enthusiastic cyclist, my view is that the edges of the roads are where the problem lies. So could some of this funding be used to repair the road edges and not just provide cycling infrastructure projects?
The criteria that we have to work to is 36% must be spent on cycling related works, preferably in excess of 50%. We've always endeavoured to put as much cycling infrastructure in as we possibly can. The second part, in the balance that is left, we can put in traffic calming measures. It's really any kind of measure that encourages active travel for walking and cycling. So, for example, this year we're looking at a hub down at Kinross where it's at the park and ride site where people could cycle to the hub, park their cycle, potentially if they have an electric bike, recharge it, get on a bus and go to Edinburgh, Perth, Dundee, Inverness, wherever, and come back, and the cycle's waiting for them. So these are kind of some of the more innovative thoughts that we're having going forward. But the balance can be used for any active travel related works. The second part of your question, I think, was with regards to the edge of the road. That really is a road maintenance issue, and I'm quite confident that the Scottish Government would not accept us putting a bid in to do works which should be carried out by our road maintenance colleagues.
Thank you. And we now move to Councillor Allen for your second question, and then the last second question will be from Councillor Welch. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This has perhaps been partly answered already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. The same paragraph 4.8 and 14, we talk about additional improvements were also made to encourage the use of public transport. Can we have some examples of that, please? Because there's nothing that I can see within the report. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Allen, for that question. Up until a couple of years ago, it wasn't an area that we actually delivered anything in, and our public transport colleagues had asked us for some missing links where they believe that the bus service would be more used if there was a section of footpath to get the public to the bus stop. So it's perhaps small hard standings or small sections of footpath that are missing. And potentially as well, what we've done at these sites is we've also provided cycle parking facilities and maybe a locker where somebody can safely leave their bike. If they have an expensive bike, the last thing they want to do is chain it to a fence. So we have provided facilities such as that in recent years. I think what you're looking at there is on the report, it's a general spend. And it's really our public transport colleagues bring the projects to the table and we look to deliver them through the year for them.
Thank you. And Councillor Welsh.
Perth and Kinross have an extensive network of core paths and as do neighbouring local authorities. Some of those core paths, actually provide significant barriers to walkers and indeed cyclists. And I'm just wondering if core paths are sort of recognised in terms of part of some of this funding for potential improvement works that will increase their accessibility and usability for all these user groups.
That's it. This time, the core path network is not an area that I'm directly responsible for, but we're well aware of the core path network. And when we're looking at missing links or even green routes, these are pieces of the jigsaw that we look to put together. And if there's a core path and then there's maybe a section of a road that we maybe feel is not suitable for people to walk along or cycle along, then that would potentially give it a higher score for us to look to provide a dedicated facility for somebody to use. So I would just make the plea, if there's something out there that you feel that you want us to look at, we're more than happy to look at that for you.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith got in with a question just before the bell. Thank you.
Yep, there we go. My question is on the outside of the village I live in Medvin. My query would be that there has been a big development there at Hayfield Bray by GS Brown, etc. And there is an entrance at the top. My question was, there's an area there to be connected up to the village that most of my constituents have asked why there was never a pavement put there. Is that the responsibility of the developer, or is that down to us just asking to get a pavement put there? Thank you.
It's possibly a bit of both. It would be my planning colleagues who would be able to give you a better definition as to what the developer is duty bound to provide as part of his development. But certainly if there's a missing link there and it isn't the developer's responsibility, and I know you mentioned Medvin, and so would I, if it's not the Trunk Road Authority's responsibility, then we'd be more than happy to look at that for you and give you our advice on that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the questions. I think I recognise in some of the questions the tension between local priorities and spending money that we've been allocated from central government. And at a time of budgetary restraint, I think it's important that we spend, if you like, money that we can bring in from elsewhere as best as we can. But I'm mindful that we should not forget overriding priorities on local issues. I'll now move the report. This report provides the members with details for the delivery of the cycling, walking and safer routes projects that were implemented in 2022-23. It also lists the proposed cycling, walking and safer routes projects for 2023-24. The report demonstrates that the full Scottish Government grant allowance was used, as well as securing additional external grants to allow more than £1 million to be spent on active travel in the Perth and Kinross area during 22-23. The projects delivered have provided improvements to the most vulnerable road users in our communities. The measures have improved road safety as well as assisted and encouraged pedestrians and cyclists in local communities to use more active forms of travel. Several projects have been provided in the vicinity of schools where the provision of infrastructure will encourage active travel for children going to and from school. In addition, improvements were also made to encourage the use of public transport. The report shows that approximately 52% of the grant funding was spent on cycling-related works, ensuring that the terms and conditions of the grant were met. I'm happy to accept the recommendations within the report and move the paper for approval. And can I now ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Yes, I'm happy to second the report, Convener. I'm hoping that with the Gran Fondo and ETAP coming forward this year, that it will inspire more people to take up cycling and explore further our beautiful countryside. So I'm happy to second the report.
Thank you very much. And in that context, I was delighted to hear that Councillor Forbes has taken up cycling. We now move to comment. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Provost. Thank you, Convener. I think it's indicative of, by the number of questions we actually had on this report, how interested elected members are in this topic, and are pleased to see that we are continually making efforts to make cycling easier and safer for all the people of Perth and Kinross. And the Vice Convener hinted on the fact that Perth and Kinross now is a cycling destination, and it attracts many, many people from all over Scotland and further afield to come and cycle our beautiful routes. So I think it's very, very encouraging that we're trying to make it as safe as possible. There are a few black spots in places that we're needing to address, which I think we're all aware of. The link between Aberfeldy and Kenmore isn't the best on a national cycle route on a 60-mile-an-hour limit road, which I think we're all aware of, but that's work for the future, and I'm sure we'll be working to try and address these situations going forward. But all in all, a great report, and I'm quite sure Mr. Cargill knew that he was going to get loads of questions, and I'm pleased with his answers, and I'm delighted with the work his department does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Robertson. Councillor Forbes.
I wasn't going to make a comment, but I felt I should. I think, Convener, you kind of guessed where I was heading, and it is, as I've said before, a little bit to do with democracy. And it does really concern me that we get this money from the Scottish Government. I welcome it, of course I welcome it, but it's the ring fencing that comes along with it that really concerns me. And I was the convener at the time when this was done. I know the pressure that Brian's team were under to deliver this and to deliver it in a very short time scale. And I was aware that if we didn't do it, we didn't spend the money, then we would lose it. And I don't think that's democratic. I know you and I may disagree on that point, but I think the simplest solution for this would be for the Scottish Government just to give us the money. And if we decide as a council, as a committee, that money should be spent fixing the road edges to make my life as a cyclist and many others slightly easier, then that's what it should be. That's a more democratic way to deal with this. It really concerns me to learn today that we now even have a Scottish Government officer kind of sitting on the shoulders of Brian's team, making sure that what they do meets the Scottish Government's priorities. But that's the way it is. I'm afraid I can't change that. We just have to live with it. I can only complain about it. But thanks very much for your comments on my cycling, and Convener, anytime you want to come with me for a cycle around the Carsagowrie, we can go and look at lots of areas of interest that you can perhaps help me get resolved. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Forbes. I thought that offer was coming. I may have to dig out my bicycle from somewhere. But no, I understand your concerns there with regard to the funding. I would hope that the allocation of a dedicated officer in Transport Scotland is to assist local authorities rather than simply to be on their shoulder. But the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. Thank you very much. There are no more requests for comment. There's no amendment. Can we approve the recommendations of this paper? Thank you very much. We now move to item 7, Gypsy Traveller Site Standards Guidance, and I would ask Robert Wills to introduce this report.
Hi there, thank you, Convener. Yeah, so the site standards document meets a commitment in policy 21 of the local development plan that we would prepare additional guidance on the Gypsy Traveller sites. The guidance is intended to set out what the requirements are for Gypsy travellers who wish to bring forward private sites. So it brings together information on licensing, planning and building standards, and also aims to make it easier to understand the criteria that we've set out in policy 21, what the expectations might be from us to ensure that the sites are safe and accessible, and to make the application process a bit simpler. So the guidance only looks at transit sites and permanent sites. It doesn't include stopping places. These are not typically brought forward through planning. It's often that they don't need planning, and Gypsy travellers have told us that the preference is for permanent sites or transit sites so they can visit family. And in practice, it's only been permanent sites that have come forward through the planning applications. So the guidance was produced with the assistance of enforcement officers, Planning Aid Scotland, so the housing officers working with Gypsy travellers, and the environmental health team, and Gypsy travellers themselves who fit in through the equalities team. And it's also been informed by best practice documents such as PAS guidance to local authorities and standards coming out of Scottish Government for council sites. And the guidance was used sort of in draft form by Environmental Health when they're developing the transient site at the Food and Drink Park proposal, and they're able to feedback from their own consultation with the community to help improve the final version of this. So, yeah, open to questions.
Thank you very much. And the first question is from Councillor Cagouli.
Thank you. My question is on the difference between permanent sites and transit sites, and whether if something is a transit site and over a period of time it evolves into being something a little bit more permanent, how that's kind of assessed, monitored, judged whether that's happened, or whether kind of after it's first designated a transit site rather than a permanent site, that's kind of just how it's always viewed by the council, or whether that's something that's an ongoing process.
Yeah, well, the answer is that we don't really know, because we haven't had any private transit sites come forward. Obviously, if we have like the Food and Drink Park one, then there would be a limit on, or ideally, sort of limit on how long people can stay, and I think that's what would be the ideal thing for transit sites, because if they become a permanent site, then and the facilities aren't there, then that would cause issues. So I think we would need to look at that through the planning process on whether there would need to be conditions on how long people could stay there.
I can see you want to come back into the supplementary, Councillor Cagouli.
Yeah, well, my follow-up question really there was going to be, at what point do you kind of say it's permanent? And then also, is the enforcement that you've kind of spoken about there on lengths of stay, would that come from council officers? And yeah, it kind of seems like something there should probably be a plan for.
Yes, no, I agree. Well, I can say it would need to come through consultation, well, through the planning process and discussion with what the needs of the Gypsy travellers are that are applying for it. I would expect that they would, if it's a particular family bringing forward a transit site, then they would want it to be secure for their own purposes. So if there is conditions through that to limit the length of stay that would be discussed with the applicants, then it would be up to enforcement to enforce that.
Yep, thank you. We now move to Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks very much for this very helpful piece of guidance in relation to this subject. at 5.8 onwards, it talks about the National Planning Framework 4 and how it takes precedence over the policy guidance that we're putting forward. And you then go on to mention that in NPF 4, it talks about supporting the creation of new sites where there is an identified need. And yet there is no mention of need within our policy 21. And, you know, obviously from what you've said, need would take precedence anyway. So why is it excluded from our policy? Thank you.
Well, the policy doesn't mention, the current policy doesn't mention need. I can't speak to the background of the actual development of the policy when it was done, or whether that was considered, but in practice, proposals come forward when there is a need. So quite often, if it's a family has outgrown the current site and they're wanting to add another pitch, or circumstances dictate that there is a need to bring one forward. So in practice, they have only come forward when there is a need. We're also obviously aware through previous the previous study that there is a need, established need for transit sites, and there wasn't quite as clear about the need for permanent sites through that study. It was sort of there's either an undersupply or oversupply, but we would certainly expect from past experience that proposals coming forward are where there is a genuine need for sites. Just through recent discussions with Gypsy Travellers, that, for example, there's a lot of Gypsy Travellers in housing. Like the majority of Gypsy Travellers in Perth and Kinross are in permanent housing, and they would ideally, a lot of them, anecdotally, what we've been told is that they would prefer to be actually on their own sites. We are looking to update the study that was done in 2016 this year through the conversation, the Big Place conversation that's being carried out. So sort of more evidence on that need will be coming forward. So then we'll have an overall council view of the need that's there.
And yeah, just as I say, I just wonder, given the kind of, you know, the NPF4 precedence, that it's an omission, if you like, in relation to our policy, not to include it because it would take precedence anyway. So I just wondered if consideration could be given as to whether that should be included in our policy. Thank you.
Yes, I think going forward into LDP3, it will be a consideration as to whether, so NPF4 currently takes precedence because it's the later in date. Going forward into LDP3, we would need to consider whether we only rely on the NPF4 policy, which is, my understanding is the Scottish Government's precedence that we only have one policy, or whether we have sort of policies that are along the lines of what we're doing. But we would need to consider that. I think from a consistency point of view, that NPF4 would probably rely on that, and then just use the guidance to illustrate how the NPF4 is taken forward through proposals.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Littlejohn wants to come in with a point of clarification. Thank you.
And I noticed that Ben Wilson, who's probably better placed than me to respond to that point, but I was going to say absolutely, we don't want to confuse people with hierarchies of policy. It's a matter of timing, and we need to make sure that LDP3 has consistency with National Planning Framework 4, but it works for Perth and Kinross, and therefore LDP3 will have that kind of robust consistency with national policy, but ensure that it works for us as well, and the two are compatible. But Ben may want to have offered something more technical than I have at the moment.
Thank you. And Ben is nodding at me, so yes, Ben Wilson.
Thank you. I'm not sure if it's technical, but it's just bringing in a connection with the Council's new local housing strategy, which was approved earlier this month by the Housing and Social Wellbeing Committee, and its action plan, Action 3.7, includes an action relating to working with the Gypsy Traveller community members to have a better understanding of their accommodation needs and preferences. And there's a set of sub-actions there which relate to what Robert was describing in terms of fleshing out and getting more detail on the need, and that will be another, progressing that action will be another piece of the jigsaw which complements the report that's before you here today and helps provide a complete context with NPF4 and with our local level guidance and aligned planning and housing policy.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I've got a couple of questions. If you don't mind, I'm going to sacrifice at least one of them and go back to the point that Councillor Kigali made, because I have to preempt what I'm about to say without, this is the first interaction I've ever had with any documentation to do with Gypsy Traveller site, so I know very little about this, but I'm still struggling to get to the point of understanding if a site just becomes permanent by the nature that people go there and stay and simply don't leave. Do we measure that? Do we have a way of measuring that, and what would we do if that's the case? I think that was the root of Councillor Kigali's question. I'm not sure we've got an answer to that, but maybe we haven't. I've missed it. If so, I apologise to Robert.
I think Mr. Wilson is best placed to answer that question. Yeah.
So 28 days in any given year is the time period under which something doesn't represent a material change of use. If something gets beyond that, then on the face of it and without prejudice to the fact and degree of the matter, potentially material change of use has occurred, and the council has its enforcement powers to require resolution through a planning application, which would then get assessed against the policy context. So I think if that answers both the questions, 28 days by law is the limit beyond which something is a material change of use and comes in the control of the planning system. Has that answered the members' questions?
But we're still not sure what the limit is. That's 28 days above the limit, or am I just misunderstanding this completely?
It's what comes into control of the planning system. So if there's something being used in a highly transitional way, then it won't require planning permission. And if it's beyond that, in any given year, it will require planning permission, and then we can assess it and determine what type of proposal it is and determine it accordingly.
I don't think that simple use can make somewhere permanent, but I think Mark Butterworth wants to come in just now.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. I think we're lost in translation here, aren't we? So we'll get a Scouser to answer the question. I think in terms of the transient site, and we're particularly, I think at the moment, we've identified the need at the Food and Drink Park. I think what will happen is we will get planning permission for that, and there'll be a set of conditions attached to that planning permission. And then if that is not followed, that will be monitored by officers likely to be environmental health or housing. If those conditions are not monitored or are not adhered to, and there becomes a potential issue, or it's demonstrated there will be a need for a permanent site, we would then go back to members, whether that be planning committee or another committee, and recommend or ask for that status to be changed. But it will be based on, I think, the experience and how it actually plays out and what the need is. But it won't just, I think, by osmosis change from a transient site to a permanent site just because people are staying longer. As I said, we'll monitor it, we'll enforce against it. If there's a need for change, we'll come back to members and seek that approval. Does that help?
Yes, is the short answer. But the slightly longer answer is that do people log into these sites like you would in a conventional caravan site? I'm really sorry, I just don't know. Or do people just literally turn up and stay? Or, you know, is there some kind of...
Effectively, what we have at the moment, we've got a negotiated stopping site where we have people, families coming and going there is limits in terms of the stay and the usage of that, which is a much shorter period of time than a transient site. And what we're seeing is people are staying a lot longer, the facilities are not there, and we've got lots of problems. So what we look to do is to move, particularly in the case we're talking about the food and drink park, to a transient site, and people will effectively just turn up, but there will be a lot more monitoring and a lot more structure around that. But yeah, there will be, and also a lot more dialogue and a lot more support. So people will simply rock up to these sites. But as I said, there'll be a lot more engagements about how long they will stay, how we can support them. But at the moment, it is effectively a free-for-all. People are turning up and they are staying a lot longer than they need to or should do and are allowed to. So it is about putting that sort of structure and organisation around it, but they can and will just turn up.
And Barbara Renton wants to come in as well.
So Housing and Social Wellbeing, Councillor Forbes approved a paper at their meeting on the 25th of January in relation to what we'd hoped to undertake as participation in a national negotiated stopping place pilot. We will continue to take our place within that, but over the course of the 18 months or so that we were working with our Gypsy Traveller communities, it proved to be very difficult to find places where our Gypsy Travellers historically were happy to stay, but equally that they felt were no longer safe as well. So we're continuing our relationship with that in terms of the negotiated stopping pilot, but what the committee agreed was that because, as Mark's saying, the food and drink park, traditionally an area where Gypsy Travellers would stay, we would make into a transient site. We had looked at 2 other areas within Perth and Kinross as well, but in terms of the negotiations with those Gypsy Travellers, then that was the best site. It is, sort of regularly, sort of used. There have been issues, sort of, I think it's fair to say that the Gypsy Travellers themselves have not felt comfortable. But equally, sort of the local residents, nearby residents and the businesses at the food and drink park. So what we're doing is looking to make that transient site more, sort of sustainable, still have rules round about it so that it is a transient site, that the expectation is that no one should stay for any length of time at all. But it is then just, as the name suggests, it's someplace that people stop over on a traditional site and then move on. We are not expecting that to become a permanent site. That is not what it is. I mean, we have 2 permanent sites at Double Dykes and Bobbin Mill, but there are other private sites across the council area. And this policy is really then just to make sure that we are taking the needs of the Gypsy Travellers into account, but also making sure that we have a planning framework round about it to deal with those cases.
Thanks, Barbara. That was really useful. So for the bigger picture, and thank you, Mark, for giving that answer, because obviously 4 years at University in Liverpool, I now understand the Scouser, because that was exactly the answer I was looking for. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. Can I ask about the servicing of sites? As someone in the Kenosha ward, we have a number of Gypsy Traveller sites, and one of the issues that come up is with regard to litter and refuse around the sites. And I was reading the report. I noticed that there should be recycling and refuse services supplied to these sites. Can you just explain to me just how the council liaises with each site in turn to see how their waste is recycled and used?
I'm not entirely sure that your question is in line with the thrust of this report, Councillor
Perhaps it's not, but I just see that. I would like to be able to advise people, just if there is issues, that there is ways around about it to deal with them.
I don't want to get diverted, but if Mark or Barbara wants to make a quick comment here, thank you.
And I don't think it's the purpose of the paper, Councillor Robertson. However, sort of that's what the environmental health team, sort of they work, sort of across the whole of Perth and Kinross. If there are any issues that people are concerned about, then that would be the environmental health team that they would contact.
Thank you. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you, Convener. My question's already been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. It's just a question around the timing of this guidance note. It's November 2019 that the local development plan came in, so that's roughly 3.5 years to bring in this accompanying guidance note. I just wondered how many other supplementary guidances we still have to go for LDP2.
Thank you. Can I ask Mr. Littlejohn perhaps to come in there?
Ben will actually have a clearer picture of how much non-statutory guidance remains to be produced, and we do report to committee annually on progress towards this. It's ultimately a combination of resource constraint and the requirement for detailed consultation. And in this particular case, as members will be aware, all of our policies and approaches relating to gypsy travellers is complex and requires detailed consideration and discussion with a very large range of stakeholders, and that in itself causes inevitable delay. But principally, the production of non-statutory or statutory guidance is down to a programme of work and the available resources to do so. But Ben can perhaps update on the current programme of work.
Happy to do so. Sorry, apologies for that. So the report before you isn't part of the supplementary guidance suite, it's the non-statutory guidance, which is a distinction which matters a lot to planners. But the set of, I'm not aware of outstanding bits of supplementary guidance from the 2019 adoption of the plan. There was a wholesale update and overhaul of over a dozen bits of supplementary guidance over 2020, 2021, and that brought things up to date. And we're now looking at coming back and updating some of those. There'll be a report later this year on one particular key one, at least one key one. So it's not, the programme is largely done, but this is the gypsy traveller situation. The national context has changed quite a bit, and so that's part of what's influenced the timing for this.
Thank you. And now the final question is a second question from Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Within section 5, there's a few paragraphs which talk about the public consultation with regards to the guidance, and some feedback, I think, in Appendix 2 in relation to some comments around it. I can only see comments from community councils and the council itself, and I don't see any particular reference in the report as to the views of the gypsy traveller community as to whether they welcome the final draft of the policy. And I wonder if someone could just advise me on the feelings of the gypsy traveller community in relation to the policy. Thank you.
Yeah, so we obviously worked with the gypsy travellers when we were developing the guidance, and then at the end, as far as consultation goes, for the final document, then that was sent through the housing team and the ecologies team that work with the gypsy travellers, and there's a representative group that the ecologies team work with as well. That was passed to them, but we didn't get back any feedback on the guidance itself after that. On the policy itself through LDP2, we did have a bit of feedback just through as we were having discussions, and they did have concerns with some of the wording of the policy. But I think the guidance has hopefully just ameliorated some of that concern by the approach that was taken to make sure that we're listening to what the gypsy travellers are saying. And so when we worked with PAS, it was a consultant, Alan Seath, who's unfortunately passed away now, But he's worked very closely and was a great advocate for Gypsy Travellers, and he gave a lot of really good advice on the guidance as we were developing it. So yes, don't have a final answer on whether they like the final form or not.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And I was failing to follow my new messages. The last question is actually from Councillor Welsh.
Thank you, convener. This paper, obviously, the focus is on the travelling community, but in terms of the compatibility of this policy with motorhome stopping off points, this is a growing area of concern and opportunity within Perth and Kinross area, and I just wondered whether there's any overlap at all.
My understanding is that there is no overlap at all. Motorhomes and those issues are dealt with separately, but I'll go to Ben Wilson.
That's correct. And in planning terms, it's a separate matter. However, of relevance is an intention to bring forward a parking policy document for Perth and Kinross in parallel with the mobility strategy project, which you'll be hearing about later in this morning's agenda. And that's something which will look at all aspects of parking, and as part of that, how it relates to tourism, motorhomes, and general parking. So that there's a gap in the policy framework, which I think relates to what you're describing, but it's a separate matter from the Gypsy Traveller sites.
Thank you. There are no more questions. Councillor Forbes, I understand your second question has been answered. I'll therefore move the report. In 2016, a study into Gypsy Traveller provision across Tayside recognised a shortage of places to stop when on the road. There has been a significant loss of stopping places in the Perth and Kinross area. Previous studies also showed a lack of private permanent sites for Gypsy Travellers in Perth and Kinross. Although there was not an anticipated shortfall in the 2016 Tayplan study, the Planning Authority supports those Gypsy Travellers who are able to bring forward their own private sites through the last two local development plans. The Council has worked with the community to explore options for stopping places, leading to the decision to explore a new transient site at the Food and Drink Park. But where families are able to bring forward their own sites, it is important that the process for this supports their needs. The Site Standards Guidance Note sets out the advice for applicants to help them bring forward applications that will meet the needs of Gypsy Traveller families and address the responsibilities of the Council as a planning authority. The paper put forward today for approval supports a commitment in the adopted local development plan to produce this guidance. The report recommends approval of the site standards as non-statutory guidance to support the delivery of private sites by Gypsy Travellers. I am happy to accept the recommendations within the report and move the paper for approval. Can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Thank you, convener. Yes, I'm happy to second the report. I think it's important that we do try and support this marginalised community to the best of our abilities, and so therefore I'm very happy to support this report.
Can I ask if there are any comments on this report? I see no comments. Nothing from John Duff in the chat. Can we agree the recommendations as set out in the report? Agreed. Thank you. Time is marching on. I think this is a natural break. Can we take a recess for comfort break for the next 5-6 minutes and come back at 11 o'clock? Thank you. Can come to order. Thank you very much. I've been asked, I understand that it's not affecting me personally, but one or two devices are pinging and beeping during the course of this machine, and I would ask if everyone can put their devices to silent so that the meeting is not disturbed by them. Thank you very much. Moving on now to item 8. The Mobility Strategy Main Issues Report, and I would ask Elliot Williamson, the Project Lead Officer, to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The Mobility Strategy will set out Perth and Kinross Council's vision for managing and developing the transport and active travel network over a minimum period of 10 years. The Mobility Strategy will consider all modes of transport for the movement of goods and people across Perth and Kinross's rural and urban setting to help achieve national targets and local objectives. The Mobility Strategy will respond to climate change agenda and other drivers of change at this time. The Mobility Strategy Main Issues Report presented today covers stage 1 of our 3-stage approach to delivering the Mobility Strategy. The report identifies problems and opportunities across Perth and Kinross Council's transport network in line with Transport Scotland's guidance. The Main Issues Report will be made publicly available via Perth and Kinross Council's consultation hub, allowing for feedback to be provided and ensuring our evidence base is robust. The report will be shared as part of the wider Big Place conversation. All the information gathered will be used to inform the draft mobility strategy. Myself and Ben Wilson are happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do members? Yes, I see the first question coming in. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Convener. My question's about page 88 of the overall document pack, or page 12 of the main issues report, and thank you for the report. It's very thorough. And I think the question I have is actually about that evidence base. Members will see there that Invergowrie railway station is noted down as having a bus service. It doesn't have a bus service at the moment and hasn't had for almost a year now. And I think my question is actually to the convener about when this committee will consider the parking regulations that will allow the bus to again serve that railway station. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bailey. I remain concerned that Invergowrie remains unserviced by the bus that used to serve it, and I would be doing all I can to encourage the works that require to be done to facilitate that to take place. I don't know if I can give you anything further at this time. Brian can come in.
Councillor Billy, thank you for the question. I don't have the specific details of timings in that, but I do know that work has been progressed on that. I do recall seeing a drawing that showed proposed waiting restrictions. I think there was a consultation with some adjacent residents carried out in the local members, so it is in process. It may well be that it's due to come forward to Barbara, who has delegated authority to approve them, and it's only if it's a contentious one that it may require to come back to committee. So I can certainly get the details following this meeting and get back to you with a more detailed answer.
Great, thank you. That's reassuring on all counts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. 1.2 points out that this is a 10-year plan, and I just look back 10 years ago and electric vehicles were hardly heard of, and the progress in that area alone is quite immense over those 10 years. I'm wondering if 10 years is too long. I wonder if we should be reducing this in terms of timescale.
think I'd go to Ben Wilson to take that question. Thank you.
So it's a strategy. So there's some broad principles which will take quite some time to implement. The other point to note is we intend to review this more frequently than ever 10 years. Its horizon is 10 years and beyond, because the scale of infrastructure change that this strategy will likely need to set out a direction for is such that it will take more than just 5 years to implement. But your point about how fast changing technology and practice and behaviour is a totally central one for this bit of work, and it will be reviewed and updated, I think, within that 10-year period.
I think, if I may, you could say exactly the same about, the national transport strategy, the regional transport strategy and development from which this is derived. And, we are at a time of technological change in transport matters, but I don't think any of that should prevent us having a strategy document that guides us over that period of time. Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. My question is in relation to 2.1 of the strategy, which talks about Perth and Kinross road traffic. The strategy also talks about alignment with their climate change action plan and net zero targets. But I wonder if it's a significant omission that we talk about trying to reduce car mileage, but there's no analysis of the mileage that's being done, is how much of these are fossil fuel miles and how much are electric vehicle or hybrid miles. And I wonder if that is something that we should consider drilling down into a little bit to see if the electric vehicle mileage are increasing and fossil fuel mileages are dropping. And I just wonder if someone could comment on that, please. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Certainly, I know that there's analysis of this particular issue going on with regard to the regional transport strategy, but I'd ask Elliot to address this in the context of our main issues report. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. With regards to your question, essentially for the main issues report, the granularity of the data isn't currently available as you described. However, it has allowed us with the open source data to identify there is this overarching car dependency, and of course there's this national priority to reduce car kilometres. However, it's important that when we just look at further stages in developing the mobility strategy, that reducing car kilometres isn't all about emissions necessarily. There's multi-benefits to reducing car kilometres in terms of other modes of transport through active travel and public transport. So in terms of the general picture, the main issue report is there to present that we do have this overarching car dependency. However, there's other strands with emissions in particular that we do also want to try and tackle. And that's when EVs in particular come into play and how we want to introduce more EV infrastructure and encourage EV transport. So there's kind of two strands ultimately to how we want to move forward in terms of tackling car kilometres, but also tackling emissions. However, that kind of granularity of data will definitely be something we'll look at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. Under the Mobility Main Issues report on page 89, first paragraph there talks about the fact that Perth and Kinross provided £2.8 million of financial support to the subsidised local bus network. That was provided from both the local bus revenue budget and the car park trading account. I just wonder if you can tell me a bit about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that information was provided by our public transport team. So unfortunately, I wouldn't be able to directly provide much more detail on the information in the main issues report, but happily to contact our team in public transport and maybe have more clarity on that.
And Barbara Renton will come in with this answer too. Thank you.
Oh. No, I think it's a benefit that the mic's not tracking to me, because apparently people watching online might not be able to see me, but apparently it needs to track to me. So the car park trading account, sort of within the legislation allows us to provide, sort of some support for public transport
if the car park, you know, sort of is linked to that. So, for example, I think some of the bus station, Perth bus station is funded through the car park trading account, Broxton Park and Ride as well. So we can use funding to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And first question from Councillor Colin Stewart.
Thanks, convener. There's a line in 5.1 which says that the mobility strategy is more narrowly known as a local transport strategy. I actually wonder whether, in terms of public engagement, when this main issues mobility strategy main issues report goes out to public consultation, whether actually a local transport plan consultation would be a more plain English way of engaging the public with the consultation.
Thank you, and I'll go to Ben Wilson to respond here.
So if we're going out for engagement, we're working with communications colleagues on a comms plan for this and how to fit this in plain English, and also as part of the wider Big Place conversation, which has already got a bit of profile and branding. The reason why this is called a mobility strategy, and generally a lot of other authorities are using the term mobility rather than transport, is because it relates to how people and goods, but particularly people, can access the things they need, and that may not necessarily involve transport. Part of the scope of this may be reduce the need to travel at all to location of destinations. So it does reflect a broader shift in thinking that the starting point isn't transport and the need for a vehicle. The starting point is thinking about what allows people to access services, and that may not involve increasing the need to travel in the first place. But the general point about plain things, we are acutely aware that a lot of this terminology will not be accessible by the general public, and that's why we want to continue to work with communications on how we talk about this.
I think you make a fair enough point, Councillor Stewart, and, you know, sort of as Ben says, we will pick that up, but we need to it isn't just about public transport, it is about moving goods as well as people across Perth and Kinross. But I'm sure our comms colleagues will be able to come up with something that is understandable to people who we want to be engaged in the consultation.
Okay, thanks for that. I think it'll be helpful if we do engage comms. When I read mobility strategy on the agenda, I was thinking about people with mobility issues, nothing to do with local transport or travel or anything like that. And, you know, walking is a mode of transport as well. So I really think something that's plain English will help. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I think you make a very good point, and I'm sure it will be picked up on. Councillor Forbes.
Mine is the second question. I think you've got first questions still to go. Councillor Kigali, for example.
You're quite right, and thank you. Councillor Kigali.
Yeah, so my question is about the 9% of people in Perth and Kinross that are using buses as their method of travel for their commute, and the fact that the Scottish Government ending of funding going to bus services ends on 31st of March, and according to Stagecoach, that means that we should probably expect a 15% uplift in terms of fares and a 10% cut in terms of their service. And given that we've got such a low figure of 9% already, if we're going to kind of set our mind about trying to increase that, is that cut a point of concern?
I'm always concerned about the viability of all of our bus services at the moment, and we are, if you like, this main issues report raises questions with regards to that. I'm not sure that your direct question, if you like, relates to the main issues report per se, but I'd ask you to sort of leave that for another forum, if you would, Councillor Kigali.
I suppose I would just say then that it may be worth in the long term the council having a think about anything that we might be able to do in terms of mitigating that, because it is a cut just absolutely at the end in funding, and that will potentially negatively impact our constituents. So whether we can do anything to kind of soften that blow would be helpful, but I do understand that it might not be strictly relevant for this specific report.
No, thank you. And it's part of the conundrum that bus services, if you like, are deregulated and they're led commercially, and there is only so much that we can do, both in terms of affordability and the legislation in terms of stepping in. If I can move to Councillor McLaren, thank you.
Thank you. My question is relating to the main issues report and the railway station observations of step-free access. We've got 4 highlighters across Dunkeld and Burnham, Invergowrie, Pitlochry, Rannoch, no. Cycle hires of no. What sort of progress and how easy it is to make progress on these pointers of no's?
Can I go to Ben Wilson to seek to address this? These are, if you like, the direct responsibility of Network Rail and ScotRail, but obviously we have a considerable interest in terms of our transport provision in the county. Thank you.
Yes, so this is one of the reasons that it's useful to have a mobility strategy at local authority level. It allows us to engage with partners like Network Rail, like Transport Scotland, like Sustrans, to address constraints such as this. Not mentioned in this report because it happened in the last few weeks. The Sustainable Travel to Stations project, which is joint with Sustrans and Transport Scotland and I think Network Rail, has been highlighting the importance of making it easy to get to train stations by sustainable modes of transport, and also putting a call out for potential projects which could address constraints at local authority level. We have made an informal, it is only an informal stage at this point, but we've made a submission to that and making use of the table before you to highlight where there's issues with our stations. So as we progress the mobility strategy itself, a key partner will be Network Rail in identifying what actions over the coming time period would help make it easier for people to access train stations by sustainable modes.
Thank you. Do you want to come back in, Claire?
Could I, Convener? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, for that. On the back of what you've just said, sustainable access to railway stations, possibly Network Rail would also consider their approach to cycles on trains. There seems to be quite a restriction on numbers of cycles available for the passenger to take their cycle on the train, and has to be booked in advance. That aspect is really quite restrictive. So it's great to hear that we're trying to encourage a sustainable access to a train station, but once you get there, what you're going to do if you want to get on the train with your bike if you're not booked on. Thank you.
Thank you. No, you make a good point, and again, that's not directly within our remit, but I do understand that ScotRail are very conscious of the increasing demand, if you like, for travellers to be accompanied by their bicycles, and they are seeking to enhance the provision on many routes to cope with that. Thank you. Councillor Forbes, your second question.
Yeah, thanks, Convener. Page 88 of the report references the Network Rail plan to develop Perth Railway Station, and I've only been here for almost 6 years. It seems to have been talking about that for all of those 6 years. I wondered if there was any update on progress on that.
I think David Littlejohn is best placed to address this. Thank you.
I sit on the project board for Perth Station. So yes, there has been significant progress in the last couple of months in that a number of options have been considered by the project board and Network Rail, Transport Scotland, ScotRail, Historic Environment Scotland, a range of other stakeholders. We've now reached a preferred option for the station. That preferred option will shortly be consulted on, but that preferred option is essentially a radical reconfiguration of the station, both to address the requirements of electrification and hybrid trains travelling north, but also to kind of reduce the footprint in the sense of reducing the amount of steps people have to take to access the various platforms. So I think it's positive news, but I can't say too much more until that public consultation is launched in the next few weeks by Network Rail and Transport Scotland.
Thanks, David. That really is good news. I'm delighted to hear that, in fact, and I know there's maybe some things you can't say, and that's okay, but is there any hint of timescale? Or my fear about this is that as technology advances, there'll be another reason to not do this stage because we might have a new type of train in 5 years' time. That's what worries me. Are you able to say anything about timescale, or are you not able to do so?
Yeah, timescale's a bit more tricky. Some of the works are able to progress quicker than others, and not least because there's £15 million of Tay City's deal cash in terms of creating the interface between buses and trains, and how the arrival at Perth is looked at and perceived by the public, and how that can be improved. The bigger plan will take a number of years. I mean, it's a 20-year investment programme at Perth Station, and following the consultation and agreement that this is the option that is being progressed, a business case needs to be made to Transport Scotland to fund it. So I think the intent is clear now. The direction of travel, subject to consultation, will be much clearer. I think the full cost of implementing this is a matter for government to consider, but some of it has to happen in the shorter term, not least the physical structures at Perth Station need either significant investment or radical change. So I think some elements of the programme will happen much more quickly within the next kind of 3 years time space. I think other elements of it are probably pushed out into the kind of 10, 15, 20 years.
Thank you very much. And the only thing I have to say is this is a project I remain very keen on, and will be doing all I can to push forward as well. Thank you. Bailey Williamson.
Thank you very much, Convener. My question really relates to a question Bailey McLaren asked earlier to Ben. It's about the ScotRail Highland passes, where if you live in PH 16 or 17, you can get a pass that will give you a 50% discount on rail travel, and I'm just wondering if that is something that we should be promoting even further, and encourage ScotRail to try and develop even further within the network in Perth and Kinross.
Elliot.
Thanks, Bailey. No, happy to answer that one. Yes, I think it's a really good example of subsidising and supporting public transport, and there's a lot of means already in place with regards to under 22 bus passes is another example with, I think, across Perth and Kinross people aren't necessarily aware of, and they're not used to the level which we'd like to think they should be used. And so I think from our end, Perth and Kinross Council, there's definitely an aspect where we should promote some of these and make sure, a lot of these funding streams are actually being supported, and ensuring that we're really encouraging people to travel sustainably. And so in short, yes is the answer, I suppose. And we're really keen to try and make the most of the kind of options out there in terms of subsidising transport.
Thank you. I think Councillor Allen, your second question now.
Thank you, Convener. On page 96, it talks about 3.1 inequalities across Perth and Kinross. It's quite concerning, really, because it's talking there about the access. 35% of Perth and Kinross data zones are at high risk of travel poverty. 18% of children live in poverty, and it goes on and it goes on. It's not good reading. One of the things that jumped out at me there is that the transport accounts for the second largest household expenditure in the UK, with an average spend of £81 per household every week. That was in 2019. Have we any gauge on what that is now and how that is affecting this particular part of the report?
Elliot.
So the reason why it was purposely presented in 2019 is because the later dates, 2020 and 2021 in particular, the value for the household spend was actually a lot lower than the trend over the years because of course, COVID and people were travelling far less. So the idea for the main issues report was to represent data from 2019, which was the most recent, but shown, I suppose, the trend in terms of the general spend of the last few years. However, granted, that value will of course go up as everything else has currently with inflation. So there isn't currently data, I suppose, post-COVID on that front, but it's something we'll definitely keep an eye out for. And I think the point certainly still stands. You know, it is an exceptionally expensive aspect of household costs, and it's something that we really want to support as a local authority.
Thank you for that response. My main concern is that petrol prices and diesel prices have raised exponentially over the last couple of years. I'm just wondering if that's probably gone from second to first and is actually having a big impact on all that we do.
Thank you. And Barbara Renton wishes to come in on this.
As Elliot said, we don't have that up-to-date information, but obviously it is a big issue, and it's one of the areas that the anti-poverty task group is looking at in terms of transport, but particularly rural transport as well. So I can give you that reassurance, Councillor Allen, that it is being looked at across the council and what it means.
Thank you. And Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. In section 2.3 of the main issues report, which is on page 17 or page 93 of our document packs, there's reference to a projected decrease in 0 to 15-year-olds of 8.1% between 2018 and 2028. A couple of months ago, during the budgeting process, I was asking staff in ECS about projections for pupil numbers, and they were saying that they would be increasing over time. So two questions. Firstly, could we get a consistent usage of which projections we use? Either we're using the national records projections, or which we're using other internal projections, because it's not helpful in one committee to have young population declining, and in the next committee it's increasing. And secondly, in terms of ageing population and which areas have more old people, which areas have more young people, that'll be dependent very much on where within Perth and Kinross. So actually, are we taking into account the fact that our mobility strategy, transport strategy, actually has to maybe refine that down to a more local geographical level, depending where you are in Perth and Kinross?
Elliot.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I suppose in reverse, with regards to question 2, that's kind of one of the challenges with regards to the scope of a strategy. I suppose fundamentally this main issues report is showing the strategic issues and problems and opportunities across our existing network. So the regards to section 2.3 on future uncertainties, it's fundamentally showing that there is an ageing population across Perth and Kinross Council. The granularity of that isn't essentially in the report, and it's not something that we decided on putting in the report, just to keep it as concise as possible, fundamentally, and as strategic as possible. However, it's definitely something that we can consider further and look into more detail as we progress the strategy. And with regards to question 1, every reference within the report is footnoted, as you'll see on the actual in the main issue report, so the reference and the data is available where it came from. However, I completely agree, we do need to make sure it's a consistent approach to what's reported on. So that's noted, definitely.
Thank you. And if I can just comment that I think it's recognised, without it being in the report, that the population in Highland Perthshire is ageing more, if you like, than in other areas of Perthshire and Kinross, where, if you like, house building is concentrated. Moving on, I think I'm now at Councillor Duff's second question.
Thank you, convener. I hope that last comment wasn't any comment around the elected members of that illustrious ward.
Absolutely not.
In relation to page 105 of the report, there's a reference there to Perth Harbour under the freight section, and I wondered, given recent decisions around the harbour, and I have to confess I'm not sure what the current status of the harbour is, but I just wonder if this is an area of the report that needs a bit of updating. Thank you.
Thank you, Elliot.
Yeah, no, thanks, Councillor. It's a good question. Yes, it's pretty much mentioned purely as an opportunity that there is something there that could be used and an asset that we currently own. When this report was being produced by myself and drafted, the movement in terms of the harbour and what was going to happen in the future of the harbour was kind of still in dispute, and I think it was going to committee. There was a bit of crossover there, potentially a bit of lag in the report. However, my understanding is that the opportunity still stands should there be potentially investment coming into the harbour. So it certainly is, I'd like to think, an opportunity, but whether that's taken forward or not is, I suppose, to be determined.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I think we have a last question from Councillor Welch.
Thank you, convener. In terms of car use and car kilometre average, it appears that Perth and Kinross is almost twice the average. Does that imply that we need to then really sort of focus on the infrastructure we're providing, for example, on a transition to electric vehicle usage, and be mindful of that in terms of we are different and in our location and requirements?
Elliot.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor. It's a great question, and yes, essentially, in short, the Ministry's report has highlighted that there is a large amount of car kilometres per person across Perth and Kinross in comparison to Scotland in general. There is a few parts of that which is worth mentioning, that of course we are quite strategically located, particularly on the trunk road network. Therefore, there is a lot of through traffic that comes through Perth and Kinross, and that data is traffic throughout for everyone, and it's just set as an average per person. So that amount is high, but there are reasons within that why it's high. However, being a predominantly rural local authority, with a population around nearly 70% of our population is rural, it is acknowledged, particularly at national level, that rural populations do have higher car dependency for many reasons. And so it is an issue that we have ongoing in Perth and Kinross, and it's something that we really wanted to strongly highlight in the main issues report. Again, that has the two strands with regards to reducing car dependency and reducing car mileage for a variety of benefits. But then there's also the aspect where we want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions emitted by transport. And ultimately, that is when we then look at EV, acknowledging that car dependency or car use will certainly remain in Perth and Kinross. So the next alternative is EV infrastructure. So there's definitely two strands there, and that's something the main report definitely want to highlight.
And I would simply add, if I can, that I think whatever work we take forward, we have to look realistically and pragmatically at the realities of a rural community in how we address things going forwards. I see no further questions. I think I've managed to keep up to date with the list. I don't see anyone looking for a question just now, in which case I will move on to moving the report. The report presents members with an overview of the Mobility Strategy project and the first major stage, the Main Issues Report. The Main Issues Report has been developed to identify problems and opportunities across Perth and Kinross' existing transport network in line with national guidance. The report allows the Council to have a robust evidence baseline for developing objectives, targets and actions in the mobility strategy itself. In moving this paper, the Main Issues Reports will be made publicly available via the consultation hub and used in the wider Big Place conversation engagement already underway. The information gathered from the public consultation and evidence already presented within the report will be used to inform the preparation of the consultative draft mobility strategy due to be reported to this committee next year. I'm happy to move the report. And can I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report?
Thank you very much, convener. I think I'm happy to second this report. I believe this represents a huge opportunity for us to at least take the first steps towards developing a plan for future generations for the transportation around Perth and Kinross, and I'm quite happy to second this report.
Thank you, and I think I have a first request for a comment from Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. I want to just briefly go back to a comment or a question that Bailey asked earlier. It was about Invergowrie, and I think it makes the point that I was trying to make in a previous paper perfectly well. Almost 2 years ago, I met with officers on site, Stagecoach, local community members, to discuss this particular issue, which to everyone else in this room, apart from the 3 elected members from Carsagowrie ward, will be of no interest. And I apologise to them for that. But I was the convener at the time. I know that we were completely tied up with the work we were doing on behalf of the Scottish Government. And I'm willing to say quite clearly here, and I'm sure the others would agree with me, that if we'd been given the option to do something that was on the Scottish Government's list or to fix this problem and allowing buses to get to the railway station, we would have all voted to solve that problem, but we couldn't because we didn't have that ability. It just really worries me that this lack of democracy, as I see it, has caused this problem in my ward and no doubt many others across the area. I just want to make that point again because I think it's important. But I'm going to finish on a positive note, and you know how much I like an acronym, and I'm pleased that you've managed to get a new one in there for me. It's STAG. So I'm going to write that in my little book of acronyms and keep for the future. And when I retire, I'll sell it to the next incoming elected member for the Carsagowrie. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. I can assure you that bus rail integration at Invergowrie is of interest, certainly to me, if not to many others. And I think ultimately part of the issue is our powers of direction over the commercial operators with regards to bus, which remains an issue. I'm glad that we have added another acronym to your list, STAG. My understanding is that the STAG process is due to be slimmed down, so STAG may get thinner than it has been hitherto. I don't know. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm not going to indulge in any further acronyms. I welcome this report. I think it's actually when you see it and can see how it links in on a kind of tripartite basis to the local housing strategy that we considered, I think it was last Wednesday, at Housing and Social Wellbeing, and also with the local development plan. And the 3 areas all kind of tie in and link in with one another. In some ways, and I think Councillor Stewart makes a very good point, it is a local transport report rather than, mobility. To me, certainly also does conjure up something rather different. But in some ways you can say, you think it's about trains and boats and planes. And we heard from Councillor Duff about Perth Harbour, and hopefully in the future it might yet still involve boats. But I do also point out it also includes buses and the coach network. And that's 2.8 million of financial support from the local bus revenue budget and the car park trading account. It covers 60 local bus services. I don't think that these figures there cover the 2 new Ember services, which are extremely good with electric vehicles. But I think there's something I just should point out to members of the committee. I know Councillor Kigali was talking about mitigating cuts. I think if one goes back to the 1st of March, and despite the challenging financial circumstances and the constraints we have and will have going forward, in the budget, the administration voted to reinstate 525,000 of the budget for public transport and for local bus services. The same applied with the independents, the same applied with Labour, the same basically applied with the Liberal Democrats, around 525, they were 506, and I'm not quite sure the small difference, but all parties voted and agreed to reinstate that budget, with one exception, the Conservatives, and that was 0, not a penny were they looking to reinstate. And I think that should be pointed out. And we can talk about mitigating cuts to bus services, but what they were proposing on a recurring basis was ripping £500,000 out of local bus services, nearly 20% of the budget. And I would just say that You know, politics is about political priorities, but that really would have had quite devastating consequences in Perth and Kinross. I think that point should be made.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Gogali, you not surprisingly want to comment?
Yeah, I'm going to have slightly less table banging in the response, but I think this almost gets to the crux of the issue. You've got really close in that as we move forwards now, we need to look at how we make these kind of businesses sustainable, and whether that is more focus on something like on-demand bus travel, potentially moving forward, and there's no point essentially running buses that nobody is on. And whilst money for the sake of money is fantastic, there does also need to be an element, and I know this is at what the crux of what the Conservative proposal was, in terms of, you know, implementing those long-term future adjustments to make these things sustainable, not just a blanket 31st of March 15% uplift in terms of fares, which is what the Scottish Government are doing in terms of their change to the funding of bus operators.
Thank you. I would simply express the hope that with this main issues report that we are moving ahead in Perth and Kinross with a local transport strategy that addresses all the realities and issues that we have with regard to the provision of mobility to the whole population here, those with cars and those without. And yes, indeed, there are certainly choices to be made, and the point has already been made earlier in the meeting about how technology is impacting on how we move and what we move. There are no further comments that I can see apart from Councillor Duff. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. Just I would like to point out that I think it is within Councillor Donaldson's own ward that subsidises a bus journey at £140 per passenger journey, and I hope he will be looking to do something in relation to that. Thank you.
Thank you. And you simply allude there to the issues that I was seeking to confront. I see no further comment. Can we agree the recommendations set out in this report? Thank you very much. We now move to item 9, the Waste Management Plan 2010 to 2025 Progress Report. And can I ask Claire Leishman, the Waste Services Team Leader, to introduce this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. The report being presented today is an annual update on the progress of the Waste Management Action Plan and summarises the strategic work carried out by Waste Services Team in 2022. The main report includes key highlights, and the appendix shows in greater detail the actions that have been achieved, are being worked on, or are new for 2023. The report also includes an update on the National Waste and Resources Agenda, policy, legislative changes or drivers, as well as our performance against national or local targets. I'd like to draw your attention to some of the main highlights of the report. Starting with the previously agreed 114 actions, have been 98 of these achieved, and further details of these are in the report appendix. In terms of landfill diversion and recycling rates, there has been a decrease of weekly general waste collected from 2013 to now of 31.7%, and in 2021 an increase of almost 1% in the recycling rate to 50.2%, placing Perth and Kinross 10th in Scotland. This comes after a decline locally and nationally of recycling and quality during the pandemic, as the lockdown presented a change in the landscape of household waste. The report makes mention of the 2.72 million secured in external funding via the Recycling Improvement Fund. That's for 2 key projects. The first of these being the rollout of the recycling in Perth City Centre, which was completed in late 2022. This provided dry mixed and food waste recycling to over 1,000 households where there had previously been a lack of provision. These facilities have been closely monitored for their use, including addressing contamination by householders and misuse by commercial businesses. I am pleased to report that no major issues have occurred. The new service has been well received and usage is increasing. The second project to be funded through the RIF funding is the rollout of the fourth wheeled bin to over 71,000 or 97% of households in Perth and Kinross, and this is to facilitate the twin stream recycling. This project is currently being planned and the rollout of bins will commence in late summer, early autumn this year, and collections starting in November. This will mean householders will be required to separate the current blue bin recycling into two streams, a fibres mix, which is paper and cardboard, and the remaining metals, plastics and cartons will be placed in the new grey lidded bin. We are currently procuring contracts for both of these recycling streams and hopeful that additional materials will be able to be disposed of via the grey lidded bin. Communications on this will be released as soon as we know what the materials accepted will be. We are also currently in the midst of procuring a new long-term solution for residual waste, and bids are currently being evaluated. An award is expected to be made by May and the new contract start on the 1st of August this year. This is a 10-year contract and will result in residual waste being diverted from landfill in time for the ban to landfill of biodegradable municipal waste by 2025. The paper also highlights the success of the Stick to the Six behavioural change campaign, which has been delivered to all of Perth, Carsagowrie, Blairgowrie and Rattray, and Crieff and Comrie. It focuses on reducing contamination of the blue lidded dry mixed recycling bin. A phase 5 of this programme is currently being delivered in Kinross and Kinrossshire, and completion is expected by the end of May. After this date, the focus will be on revisiting hotspots, areas where recorded contamination has crept up following the initial run of the campaign and where refresher work is necessary. Thereafter, it's anticipated that the focus will shift to the rolling out of the fourth bin for twin stream recycling, which I've obviously already mentioned and is further detailed in the report. Another point, the current waste management plan was first devised, as you mentioned, in 2010 and runs up until 2025. During this time, there have been many achievements, additions and significant changes to policy and legislation, and it is proposed that a new plan start to be developed later this year with a view to presenting to committee in 2024. The new plan will include a route map similar to the anticipated Scottish Government Circular Economy route map, which is expected later in 2023. The Perth and Kinross plan will include national drivers and how we intend to deliver these at a local level. Further details on this is in the policy update part of the report. Moving on, the much anticipated Scottish Deposit Return Scheme, which was approved by Parliament in 2020, is due to come into force on the 16th of August this year. A deposit of 20 pence, as we know, will be levied on all single-use beverage containers, which will be returned once the item is presented for recycling. We anticipate significant changes to the composition of our curbside recycling, less glass at centres and points, less littering of the items included in the scheme. Once the scheme is settled in, we will be in a better position to report back on these changes, including the impact to our commercial waste collections and to income. The Deposit Return Scheme is a form of the extended producer responsibility, and the current UK packaging scheme is being reformed, and proposals outline that from 2024 local authorities will be compensated for managing packaging waste. This will include street litter and packaging in bins. As detailed in the report, a payment model is being worked on and an update will be brought to committee once more information is available. The report and appendix provides a more detailed update of the points I have summarised, as well as outlining other key points of note, and would ask committee to approve the new actions in 115 to 120. Thank you for your time. My colleague Sheila Best, Waste Services Manager, and myself are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. And the first question is from Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, convener. One of the things which I don't think I saw an update on in the report, which I know is of a great concern to our residents, is non-collection. And I think there was a period where whenever the council put updates on lockdowns with the waste management vehicles, residents were wondering, playing a game of breakdown bingo on the council's Facebook page. So I wondered what actions we've been taking to address the reliability of the waste management service.
And Mark Butterworth will respond to this question.
Yeah, thanks, convener. I think the problems that we incurred, particularly last summer, were largely in relation to the fleet workshop. We struggled, to be perfectly honest, to recruit, so we had a number of vacancies. Hopefully now we've addressed that. We still have a vacant fleet manager post, which we're hoping to recruit to in the next couple of months, really. Well, recruit and put in place in the next couple of months, but it was largely around the resources in the workshop, which have now been addressed.
Thank you. And Bailey.
Thank you, and thank you for the report. My question's about the proposed fourth bin. I think it's there's two very closely connected questions on this. One is about whether we've explored the option of a segregated bin like they use in some areas of England, and then secondly, if I may, as to whether we've consulted with people to ask what they think, residents to ask them what they think about the notion of having to manage a fourth bin, and if we haven't, will we consult before we do this? Thank you.
Sheila?
The twin stream service that we are moving to is aligned with the recycling charter, which we are, as a council, a voluntary signatory of, and obviously that's based on kind of best practice. We're kind of mindful that segregating it further than what we're proposing, which is the 2 bins for dry mixed recycling containers, is probably too significant to kind of move to that. And obviously we do have deposit return scheme coming in, which will then remove a large number of items from the curbside collection. In terms of consultation, no, we haven't consulted the public around that. We have obviously based moving forward on this service on a number of factors, looking at whether that will improve quality, whether that would improve our recycling rate. Does it give people more provision in terms of materials they can recycle? What is the carbon impact of moving to that? So all these factors were assessed as part of our funding bid to move to twin stream. So in that regard, we've had that due diligence done in terms of sort of Zero Waste Scotland to look at, is this a good model in terms of moving that service forward?
Thank you. Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Convener. I'm really keen that we're trying to make sure that people put the right things in the blue bins. My wife spends hours making sure I do it. Could we have an update on how Stick to the 6 is going?
I think your wife should have a conversation with mine. I am constantly chided about my attention to detail in regard to what goes in what bin. But Sheila, more seriously, the question with Claire.
Thank you. As I mentioned, we're currently rolling that out in Kinross. What we have found, rolling it out in Kinross and Kinrossshire, which obviously is quite pertinent to yourself. What we have found is we get a lot of initial interest from the public. Obviously, we're out there, we're tagging bins, and there's a lot of chat goes on in the communities. But what we do find is the intense work that we do does result in the contamination levels coming down. Obviously, we've written to a lot of the households prior to that, so that the intervention on the ground, I think, is absolutely key to getting the results and allowing people to understand, because everybody's too busy to look at probably leaflets that are coming in or look at websites, that sort of thing. But what we do find is the intervention on the ground is absolute key, and the consistency with that. So I would say overall it has been a success. We have brought, I mentioned the recycling, so the contamination rates coming down, and that continues to do so when we have put in concerted effort. But as I mentioned, we do need to focus on particularly those that are starting to creep back up and maybe address those hotspots. Hopefully that's helped with your question.
Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, Convener. Just interested in what preparatory work we've had to do for the rollout of the deposit return scheme. I mean, no specific questions as such, but for example, have we bought reverse vending machines? Have we spent a lot of time preparing for it? Has there been any engagement with local shops about managing the deposit return products and so on? So just any kind of general information on that would be useful.
Sheila.
So there's been a number of things happening. The first is that obviously we have a school estate, which technically falls under the scheme. So we've set up a regional Tayside group, which consists of waste services, facilities managers and Tayside contracts to look at the implications for all schools across Tayside. There has been a number of questions around schools that's been raised by Assist FM to the Scottish Government, and we've only just received a kind of update on the response in relation to some of those questions, including things like how we manage things like free school meals, the implications around glass, and how we're actually designated. Are we a return point operator, or would we be seeking an exemption for the scheme? So there's a number of questions still outstanding. That group continues to meet on a very regular basis to work that through. In terms of from a waste and operational side, we have considered whether we would introduce reverse vending machines at recycling centres. However, we can't determine that at the moment until we understand the full mapping of where all return point operators are going to operate, and whether there would be any gap that would require us to potentially provide that. There is a kind of business case that we would have to look at whether we would get enough volume to cover costs in relation to that. So I think that's still something that we are considering. In terms of recycling points, we will have to consider going forward what service we provide for the remaining glass that is not covered by the scheme. So that could be things like glass jars. We obviously have an extensive network of bring sites, recycling points across Perth and Kinross. So we'll have to consider what service going forward we will provide. So I think to answer the question, at the moment, we haven't incurred any costs. We haven't bought or leased any reverse vending machines, but obviously all these things will continue to be considered. What we have done is paused procurement on a new glass recycling vehicle until we can determine what our methodology for collection of the remaining glass will be going forward.
Thank you. And Councillor Kigali.
This is probably better directed at you, and it's not strictly within the bounds of the paper, so you may get slightly frustrated with me. But it is on the DRS, and that's mentioned plenty. And I was just wondering whether, given this is the Economic Development Committee, there was anything planned in terms of a report about the engagement that's gone on with local businesses, if that's happened, or the effects that it may have moving forward. Because I know it is a point of concern for a lot of SMEs, and given this is the Economic Development Committee, I was wondering if there was something as convener that you'd be willing to undertake.
Thank you for that, Councillor Kigali. I'm sure that perhaps the most appropriate response is to prepare a briefing note in respect to that, and I'll be happy to give that undertaking that a briefing note on that subject will be prepared. If I may simply add that I sincerely hope that the DRS comes in and is rolled out successfully. I frequently visit somewhere where they have a successful DRS, and it's good to see, and I hope we get it here. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Convener. At 5.12, we talk about the summary about the scheme itself, but we suggest that retailers, if eligible, can apply for an exemption. Can you tell us which retailers that would be and what the eligibility is? Thank you.
Sheila, thank you.
So obviously the council is not managing that. At the moment, the exemptions are being managed through Zero Waste Scotland, and there's different considerations for retailers in terms of those seeking exemption. So that could be things like you'd be seeking exemption on the grounds of environmental health, also around the kind of size and scale of your premises, whether you have the ability to provide that service safely. So I would encourage any retailers or anyone considering what their approach is to look at the guidance within Zero Waste Scotland or contact them directly to discuss the exemption process.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, convener. Just one question, but can I first of all thank Mark Butterworth for coming back to myself, Councillor Kigali and Baillie Brock so quickly, and to several local residents about the position in Glenlednick. It's what leads on to my question, but I appreciate your response, and I know you're going to give further updates. But one thing I would point out, Glenlednick, north of Comrie, it's around 25 households. It's not, it is a rural area, but it's not an inaccessible area, certainly as far up as Invergeldy. The question is this: under 5.20 we state, Perth and Kinross Council have participated in a cost modelling exercise to exemplify costs incurred by rural and inaccessible authority areas in Scotland, as well as a further workshop to assist DEFRA with the scheme design. Can I ask just what that exercise really involves? Maybe I've overlooked something in the appendix, but because it is about rural areas, I think we need to try and give them the same provision of service as urban settled areas. Can I ask what's involved with this exercise?
Sheila, thank you.
Thanks. That's a good question, Councillor Donaldson. I think we were really pleased to be invited to discuss the specific challenges we have as a rural authority in terms of collection, and we were joined by a number of other authorities in the same position, including island authorities who obviously have their own specific issues as well. But I think what they're looking at is obviously there's a profile at the moment about different local authority demographics, but they've absolutely recognised in particular examples that we've given where we travel long distances down a road which there's no opportunity to do a circular route, and we have to come back on ourselves. So we have a lot of inefficient roads that cost a lot of money in terms of collection, and obviously our collection costs will then be higher than other local authorities. So we've provided a number of examples to them of just those types of examples which then make it more challenging in terms of costs for us as an authority. And we will then be grouped within a benchmark group of other similar authorities so that we will then get the correct payment in terms of the costs that we incur. So I'm hopeful the fact that we've been asked to engage, we're providing them with information and we're continuing to engage, that I'm hopeful that we will receive the requisite payment for that does account for the costs that we incur for cost of collections. In terms of your final point, obviously we do have service provision across the area. In terms of our 3-bin service, we've got about 81% coverage. We are seeking to increase that where we can. And what I would say is that's definitely something we'll take forward into the conversations, whether it's about extended producer responsibility or whether it's with the Scottish Government with the forthcoming consultations around organic waste. We will be putting forward that, you know, our desire is to expand service, but there's obviously costs involved. Sometimes those are greater costs for these areas that we're not currently covering. And just finally to mention, the other reason some areas do not receive coverage obviously is down to health and safety reasons, which is something that's tied in with what you've just mentioned. So we have to consider in all instances, is it correct and safe to do a collection within a certain area? And then in that case, it might be a smaller vehicle which has higher costs. So we continue to review these things with our operational colleagues, but our desire is to obviously expand service for all householders where we can.
Thank you, Sheila, for that thorough response. Thank you.
Thank you. Now go to Councillor Smith.
Thank you very much, Convener. This is a subject that is actually very, very close to my heart. I look at it in such a way that I look at the thing it says that, excuse me, sorry, that's the report for waste management plan. What I would like to understand is that on 3.5, the street cleanliness is fallen quite substantially. Well, I think it has fallen quite substantially. I feel personally myself that it should be really right at the top, because Perth is our main area, our place that we should look upon as a lovely city, our surroundings. Unfortunately, the cleanliness is way below what I would class as my standard. I personally, in the last 3 weeks, have picked up 90 bags of rubbish along the road between Mervyn and Huntingtower. Now, I know that's an A85, but people coming into our area, seeing all this lying about, and I think it's Scotland-wide. Scotland's got to pick itself up, and we've got to really put some sort of management plan into solving this problem. I'd just like to know why it's such a small part of this report, the cleanliness, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. And I can only applaud your community mindedness in attending to certain matters of waste yourself. But Sheila.
Some of the other actions within the appendix do reflect some of the work we're doing around litter and fly tipping. We are awaiting the results of the Scottish Government consultation around a new litter and fly tipping strategy. So when that comes forward, we will be able to bring further information back to committee about a forward plan in terms of tackling some of those issues. But we still continue to, prioritise tackling the litter issue. Obviously, I'd like to promote the fact that we're currently in Spring Clean 2023. I know a number of elected members will be joining us, taking part in that litter picking. And I think it's important to also recognise that we have a fantastic community effort. We have a number of host litter groups that not just in Spring Clean but throughout the year are kind of helping to tackle that issue within their own communities. I think it has to be across the board an effort to tackle litter and fly tipping. We have to obviously have education, not just within schools, but obviously within communities. We have to make sure we have the right services and infrastructure, and we also need to look at enforcement where that's required. And the Scottish Government is considering some new changes to legislation to make tackling things like, for instance, littering from vehicles, something that's able to be tackled. So we do, although it might not be reflected in the report, we do prioritise obviously tackling litter and fly tipping, and we'll continue to work on that area.
Thank you very much for that. Could I ask for one thing to be done, please? And that would be on our own roads system, that when we come to cut the grass, which will be shortly, that somehow or other you get a group in front of the grass cutter, so that instead of cutting it into a million pieces, that you can pick the litter up first. Just a small thing. And the other one would be, there's a nice notice as you come into Perth from the 85, which says, be proud to be, if you're proud to be Scottish, who is dumping all this rubbish on the road, right? Maybe it would be a suggestion to turn it around so that you're going out of the town rather than coming into the town. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Sheila, if you would, I'm not sure who that sign belongs to. I'm not sure it's a council sign. Sheila.
Yes, I don't think it is one of our signs. Obviously, like I said, I've mentioned Spring Clean 2023. We're putting obviously an extensive campaign out at the moment, just promoting activities that people can take part in. But I take cognizance that maybe there's more we need to do in terms of raising awareness. So happy to look at that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And if I may, I think your point about sweeping for litter ahead of the cutting is a good one, and I hope that can be taken cognizance of. Thank you. Councillor Duff.
Thank you, Convener. I was going to ask a question about the percentage of producers and retailers that have registered for DRS, but now that you've agreed to produce a briefing paper, if you're happy to include it in that, I'll forgo the question just now.
Thank you, and I'm sure that can be included. Thank you. Councillor Carr.
Just a quick question about rising levels of contamination within recycling waste and obviously the financial implications that this can have. Can I ask if the percentages of contamination waste can be broken down to particular areas? And as a follow-up query to that would be if the targeted Stick to Six campaigns are having a marked positive effect on contamination levels.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. So the particular areas, yes and no, we can break it down. We know through the monitoring where the hotspots are, if you like. What we have found is areas, I won't name them, but certain areas within Perth tend to have more contamination than others. But as I mentioned earlier, we are seeing positive results from that. And where anything is starting to slip back up, then we will go in and address those. So it's done by physically monitoring on the streets, having a look at what is deposited in the shed, and obviously we get feedback from the contractors as well that deal with the DMR. So hopefully that answers your question about the particular areas. And your second question was on the reduction of contamination. Yeah. So definitely, I was just going to look at the statistics, sorry. I can forward on to you the data that we have of percentage. Sorry, I don't have it on the screen at the moment, which shows certain bits of fluctuation around Christmas, New Year, that sort of thing, but definitely that things are starting to come back down. And so overall, yes, there has been a good reduction and the scheme has been a success.
So thank you for your comprehensive answer to that. That's much appreciated, and it's good to see that the Stick to Six campaign is having a positive effect, and also that you do have the ability to target hotspots as well. That's good news. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm reminded that the schedule has us out of this room at 12:30, so that I would ask that remaining questions can be asked concisely, and similarly with comments in due course. Thank you. Councillor Welch.
Thank you, Convener. I note in the main report section 4.5 talks about the residual waste being diverted from landfill to an energy from waste treatment facility. I guess, you know, this aspect of waste is effectively fuel, and ultimately my understanding is these plants will generate heat and also importantly electricity. Is there in the contracts a process, some recognition that we could, as well as paying for our waste to be suitably disposed of, that we get effectively additional benefits, for example, for electricity for the citizens of Perth and Kinross? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor. We're currently procuring the contract, so I'm not able to sort of discuss any kind of more detail until we're aware of who the contract is going to be awarded to. But in general, yes, you're correct. The principles around energy from waste are it has the benefit of producing electricity and that potential heat offtake as well, which is extremely beneficial. So I'm happy to bring back further detail of the proposed solution once we've awarded the contract, which should be around May this year. I think the other thing that we've included within the assessment for the contract is obviously a carbon management plan, so we will also have a detailed assessment of the carbon benefit, and that will be something that will be continually monitored throughout the contract as well, so we can provide further information around that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Forbes, your second question.
Thanks, Convener. My second question is for you. I'm sure you'll be pleased to hear, and it's 5.23. It says SEPA and the Scottish Government have been working with UK partners to develop a digital waste tracking system that will be adopted by all 4 nations. And I wonder if you agree with me that working across all parts of the UK is the best way to solve all of our problems, and if you think the deposit return scheme would be better if the Scottish Government held on until the UK Government are ready to launch theirs.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. There are many issues that are dealt with on a wider than single nation perspective. Some of them is all of the UK, some might be on a European level, and some even on a global level. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Thanks, Convener. General question, really. Does the administration, sorry, I'll just pitch it first. We're quite aware of where many of the hotspots are for fly tipping. So my question is, does the administration have any plans to buy more fly tipping cameras that would help with enforcement? Thank you.
I think that there was additional funding in our budget to address the fly tipping issue, and it's an operational matter as to how that is that money is best spent on addressing the problems that we have. But cameras, I'm sure, is one of the things that could be considered in points of particular frequency of fly tipping. Thank you. Bailey.
Rest assured, my question isn't for you, Convener, so you can have a wee break. The stick to the six has been very successful, and it's a pretty crisp message, and I've had success in explaining to people the enforcement's been good as well. However, I'm just thinking ahead to a position maybe 9 months from now where there's the fourth bin and there's also the deposit return scheme, where to my calculation 2 of those 6 are going in a different bin, 1 of them is going back to the shop. Do we have a plan for how that message will evolve so that we're not spending too much time educating people on the thing that's going to change within the short to medium term? Thank you.
I'm sure we're always looking at evolution of service, and Sheila, up to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Bailey. Yes, that's a very good question, and obviously it's been challenging for the project team to ensure that we definitely align between the message we're putting out around our Twin Stream service and what's coming forward from deposit return. What we have been assured again in the last week is that the communications for deposit return will be coming out 6 to 7 weeks before the date of launch, which is 16th of August, which aligns with when we would be starting to put communication out around Twin Stream. So what we are looking to do is ensure that it's one communications message to all residents that will be really clear about what will be going within their curbside containers and what will also be captured by deposit return scheme. So there will be a significant communications plan that will be delivered starting around June, July, as we start to deliver bins, but so that people are really clear that when that new scheme starts in November, what will be going in. But obviously deposit return will come in prior to that, so people hopefully will be getting familiar with what they're doing there. But like I say, we have that benefit of being able to then really solidify that within our own communication. But in terms of deposit return, there will be a national communications coming out around that system as well.
Thank you. Councillor Stewart.
Thanks, Convener. My question is around the fourth bin / twin stream. I think that people probably aren't aware that this is coming down the road, and I appreciate that what Best has just said about putting out a communication that will go out at the same time as the deposit return scheme. But my concern is that we haven't, I think you said in an answer to an earlier question, we haven't consulted. We don't know what the impact of the deposit return scheme will be on our recycling streams, and B, we haven't consulted with the public about this. People won't be aware that you know, they've got to make room for a fourth bin in their gardens, and potentially losing garden space because of it. That will be for the sector of the population where there are 3 bins already. I think that city centre people were only recently getting a recycling bin. There are certainly lots of areas of Perth Kinross which don't have a third bin, a brown bin, or the option of a brown bin. So are we in danger of putting ourselves in a position where we are seen to be doing this to people rather than taking them with us?
Thank you, Sheila, if you would.
In terms of communication, obviously we have made announcements over the last year in relation to the kind of funding to alert the public to the fact that the service is changing, and obviously today's committee report also provides that opportunity to introduce that the service will be changing. In terms of the actual detail, we always feel that's best to provide that sort of closer to the date of moving to that service, so people are very clear about how that impacts them directly and the timescales for that. And so, as I was referring to before, that will be a very quite detailed communication with the public. I take on your point around the consultation. However, I suppose, as I've restated, that we feel that the benefits are quite significant, including the potential for financial savings for this local authority, which in the current climate is important, as well as the environmental benefits of moving to this system. In terms of those that are concerned about space allocation, obviously we will work with residents around that, and that there will be options. So we're happy to kind of work with the community to make sure that this is successfully rolled out.
Thank you. I will now move the report. This report updates members on the core strategic work carried out by Waste Services and highlights the continued efforts to reach national recycling and composting rates at a local level. It has been a challenging time due to the pandemic, which resulted in a local and national decline in recycling statistics, but you will see that the projects and actions taken have contributed to improving performance. The delivery of new services and close community work with residents and businesses are key to ensuring the upward trajectory continues and targets are met. The report demonstrates the work achieved and currently being undertaken, and those, together with the new actions planned, give a good foundation from which the council, residents and businesses can assist in achieving the targets both now and in the future. The upcoming review of the Waste Management Plan will align with Scotland's Circular Economy Route Map to 2025 and beyond, and will ensure that the council is ready to embrace the many industry changes and challenges. I am happy to accept the recommendations within the report and move the paper for approval, and I ask Bailey Williamson to second the report.
Happy to second the report, convener.
Thank you. There is now space for comment. Are there any comments? Yes, Councillor Stewart.
Thanks very much, convener. I think I would just take the opportunity firstly to restate my concern about public awareness about what the effect on this and what adjustments they will have to make from the introduction of the fourth bin. Hopefully we can be proactive about that, so the people that do need to make physical adjustments have time to do it rather than just being presented with it in short order. We've spoken a lot today. A lot of members have raised questions about the deposit return scheme. I'm glad to see that it looks like we might be getting to a point where there will be a deposit return scheme, although I remain concerned about the detail of its implementation. 5.5 years ago, when this council met in Kinross, then Councillor Barnacle and I brought forward a motion which was supported unanimously, offering the services of this local authority as a pilot area, and I think it would have been useful at that point if that offer had been taken up, because we might have been in a position nationally where we had a more workable scheme that people could understand, ready to go. I won't repeat my tale about reaching under the fences and hedges to collect all the Iron Brew bottles and take them back to the shop that I did when I was a small child. One thing that we haven't touched on, I don't think terribly much in the questions, which I'm very pleased to see in the report, is the use of the smart waste technology. I do or have had, and I'm sure that a lot of other elected members have had concerns raised with them about non-collection, and then when people phone up to complain, they're told, well, you didn't present your bin, and then they'll send us back a picture of a street full of bins that were out and haven't been collected. So I think while there could be a disagreement between the bin collection crew, the complaints handling team and our residents, the use of that smart waste technology, I hope will actually be able to answer the question about whether the waste has been collected. And finally, on an uplifting note, I wonder if you would join me, convener, and indeed the committee, in commending my constituent and Councillor Welch's constituent, Martin Shaw, who was featured in the press yesterday for the huge amount of volunteer litter picking that he has done in and around the Cooper Angus area.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we are all grateful for all members of the community in all places who contribute to keeping our environment as clean and tidy as they possibly can. And I would simply express the wish that others in other places can work collegiately as possible to introduce the DRS as soon as possible. Councillor Kugali, you said you have an incredibly brief comment. I'll allow you the odd minute.
Yes, it's just a second the thanks that Councillor Donaldson raised in regards to how quickly the officers managed to get on top of the Glen Lednock issue, and really just say that I'm sure we as ward councillors really do appreciate it, but I'm sure the residents also will be immensely grateful. So just have that on the record. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. And Councillor Forbes.
Thanks, convener. It looks like we might just about meet your 12:30 deadline, but that does concern me that we seem to be under pressure to finish quickly, and there seems to be an unusual pressure on the services for committees such as rooms and staff. And this seems new to me. I don't know what's changed, but hopefully you've got some plans to try and resolve this, because I'm sure you don't want stifled debate any more than I do. I want to first of all praise the staff for the stick to the six. I wish it was easier to say. It's been an overwhelming success, and despite the huge number of complaints that we got at the start, I remember I was encouraged by Sheila and our team to stick with it, and they were absolutely right to do so. It's made a huge impact, not only on our recycling rates, but also on our council finances. And like you, convener, I really hope that the DRS goes ahead successfully. I have my doubts, and I do have some real concerns about the impact it will have on the council. It worries me the Chief Executive of Circularity Scotland is reported to be on 300,000 per year, which is for non-profit organisations seems slightly high. It worries me we'll have a further 200 diesel lorries running around Scotland, but we'll wait and see what happens. As I alluded to in my earlier question to you, I think it would have been much more successful had it been UK-wide, but I appreciate you and I will have a different view on that. And can I just finish by congratulating my colleague Frank Smith, who's collected, as he said, something like 94 bags of litter from the roadside around his ward over the last couple of weeks, and grateful to the comments that you made, convener, that others should do the same. But I think what Frank said is more important. People shouldn't be chucking it out the windows of their car in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment, Councillor Forbes. I certainly agree with the sentiment that people should not be chucking stuff out in the first place, but that is a continuing matter of education, I believe. I see no request for further comment. Can we agree this report? Agreed. Thank you very much. That brings us to the end of today's business on the agenda. Indeed, I have no wish to stifle debate, and I can assure people that if issues require it, we will continue and other things will have to be delayed. Thank you.